from J. Ion. As a child, I often accompanied my father to his acupuncture sessions. Because my dad was receiving a specialized acupuncture treatment that required the use of gold-plated needles that were very expensive compared to the regular disposable needles, my dad had his used needles sanitized after every use and stored in a Tupperware container, then brought home to be kept until the next session. It was a regular sight for his container with the gold-plated needles to be placed on the kitchen counter, where my mom usually bakes. Even though I was a child, I knew not to mess with the needles, because it was dangerous, and I knew my father would get very angry if I lost his expensive tools for treatment. There was a time when my grandmother decided to stay for a month with my family. One of those days, she decided to go to the traditional Chinese medicine clinic, where my dad got his acupuncture treatment, to get a consultation and treatment for her weakening general health. As my grandmother and I waited for my father to get ready, I crawled onto the kitchen counter and took the container with the gold-plated needles in it, and I started shaking it like a tambourine out of boredom. My grandmother saw through the semi-transparent lid of the container and remarked at how fine those needles were. This is when she, being descended from a long line of powerful shamans in the superstitious, rural villages of Thailand, started telling me about susuk, or colloquially known as the magical needle treatment. According to her, very fine and small needles will be placed deep into the facial muscles and skull of a person who seeks beauty, fame, and fortune from a witch doctor. The needles are not inserted physically, but magically, as in the witch doctor has to perform a ritual to make spirits, typically evil ones, bound by black magic, to materialize these tiny needles deep within the face of the person, without puncturing the skin at all. Apparently, this susuk, or magical needle treatment, was very popular among aspiring artists and tycoon wannabes who want the easy and fast way to stardom and success. Me and my child brain couldn't comprehend the idea of having needles anywhere on the head, or the concept of black magic. I remember asking her repeatedly, "Isn't it painful? Why do they do it? Can't they feel it?" She explained that women used it to make themselves irresistibly beautiful, and men would use it to make themselves rich and powerful. As a child, I couldn't wrap my head around the logic and logistics of doing such a procedure. I remember thinking that my grandmother was a nutter, because there was no way anyone could do something so awful to themselves and instantly become beautiful, wealthy, powerful, famous, or successful. It sounded a lot like those endings in fairy tales, where everyone lives happily ever after, immediately at the conclusion of the worst time of their lives. I didn't think much of the story that my grandmother told me until I stumbled across a movie based on this susuk many years later. A relative of mine bought several DVDs of supernatural horror films to watch during the long holidays, one of them being a movie based on the practice. The movie was actually titled Susuk. This piqued my interest because the memory of what my grandmother told me resurfaced. However, she'd been dead for several years at that point, so I couldn't ask her without the utilization of a Ouija board or a psychic. So I turned to good old Google to find out more. Turns out susuk wasn't as straightforward and clean-cut as the brief story my grandmother told me. Other than the hefty fee and expensive offerings to be given to the witch doctor, the procedure itself was an unstable one, where if the witch doctor was not well trained and incompetent, it could be botched so badly that the life of the person requesting the magical needle treatment will be taken by the very same spirits meant to endow that person with unnatural charm and riches. Even in the case of a successful susuk application, the newly seductive or fortuitous person has to observe very strict rules to maintain the efficiency of the black magic. These rules include never putting anything pointy in the mouth, never crossing a body of water, do not prick or injure any part of the skin, avoid sacred places and sharp objects, including broken glass and ceramics, must not be out of home on certain days of the month, and never reveal the true names of people and places involved in the procedure. Those who request for plenty of enhancements, or they desire more than just beauty or wealth, must offer more to the witch doctor and the spirits maintaining the black magic, sometimes even blood sacrifices on a regular basis. Death for those with susuk is extremely painful and slow, especially for those who have been fatally wounded or gravely ill, because the spirits bound by black magic will not let the soul leave the body, until they have been appeased and freed by the witch doctor. So those who do not remove their stay alive and enduring every moment in a lucid manner. I, for one, will never take part in any practice of black magic. From the stories my grandmother told me of her childhood filled with supernatural encounters, dark desires of humans, battles between good and evil, I know for a fact that some things in some places are not meant for mere mortals. The Witch of the Towpath, submitted by Metalhead1. Let me start off by saying I've never really held stock in anything ghost or paranormal related. I guess I'm an atheist at my roots, and I love science and logic. But one dark night in my hometown of Williamsport, Maryland, changed the way I think completely. It happened nearly 10 years ago, when I was 16 going on 17 in my hometown. It was one of those places like everybody knows everybody. Not a lot of crime, hardly any violence, beyond the occasional bar fight that ended up in the streets. All that being said, I loved it there. It was peaceful, serene. My girlfriend and I had just broken up. It was a pretty bad and ugly breakup. I was saddened and angry. I had been very much in love with that girl, but breakups happen. Even as a knucklehead teen, I knew this, but I felt distant. I suddenly felt distant from everyone and everything. I wanted to be alone, completely. So I told my folks I was going to one of my many close-knit friends. It was a lie, though. I had no intention to do that. So I walked to the towpath that wasn't far from my house. The walk was always relaxing and therapeutic. Walking the towpath, I admired nature and the river nearby. All of it became even more gorgeous during sunset. It really helped me calm down and helped me think better. I keep walking through the towpath a good ways in, and there's not a soul in sight that night. It was getting pretty dark, but I had no care in the world. Not with me being emotional at the time. At one point I sat down, stewing in my emotions and contemplating how I lost her. I'm man enough to admit I cried a little too. As I'm sitting there in the near darkness, completely alone, I suddenly felt the sensation. That cliched feeling people always say they have. It's a real thing. Like someone is watching you nearby. Someone you can't see, but you know they're there. I've read this phrase many times before, but never did I believe that it actually happened. Yet there I sat, with absolutely no fear in my heart, when something put me on edge. I felt chills and goosebumps. I stayed quiet for a while, steadying my breathing to listen. That's when I heard a rustling in the leaves, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. Right away I assumed it was a bear. It sounded heavier than the smaller animals, like squirrels or raccoons, so that's what I assumed it was. But bears are pretty rare around these parts. Still, I wasn't about to take a chance with that. I just thought I'd get out of there. I began to steadily jog away. Then I began to convince myself that I'm just imagining things. I slowed down back to a walk, and I laughed to myself, thinking about how silly I'd be. When I hear this out of nowhere, "Leave now!" My goosebumps and chills return tenfold as I spin around, facing where the sound had come from. Keep in mind at this point, it's completely dark out, not pitch black, but enough to be pretty eerie. And then I see her. Not too far from me, there's a silhouette of a woman. She's hard to see, as she appears to be wearing all black. My heart sank, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my life was in danger. The woman raised one spindly hand towards me and reached out her finger, a bony, withered finger. I wasn't welcome there, and I knew if I didn't listen to this scary woman, she was going to do something unthinkable to me. Without even knowing it, perhaps by instinct, my eyes were searching for her face, and they found it. She was wrinkly and thin. Half of her teeth were gone, and where her eyes should have been were empty sockets. I snapped myself out of the paralysis, and I bolted out of there as fast as I could. All those years of sports finally paying off for something important. I exerted every muscle I had, afraid that if I didn't get away from this woman, I wouldn't be alive any longer. After maybe 20 yards of running, I turned behind me, fully expecting her to be gone or away from me. But somehow, she was closer than before. Still pointing, but motionless. It was like she was gliding towards me. That's impossible. I turned away again, facing ahead of me. I could see the end of the towpath. I closed my eyes and sprinted until I felt the gravel just before you get to the bridge. I opened my eyes. The bridge was so close, yet so far. Again, rather hesitant this time, I turned around to look at the woman, and immediately I felt tons of relief. She was further away now, but still gliding toward me. This time I couldn't take my eyes off of her, off of the danger that was approaching. But I kept running, not even looking where I was going. And right before my eyes, she seemed to evaporate. Like smoke in the wind, she was just gone. But I'm not nearly done running. I run all the way to my friend's house, the nearest place I felt safe at, and I frantically try to tell them and his dad what I just experienced. Of course, my friend was skeptical and even laughed at me. But for some odd reason, his father took me seriously and believed every word. It turns out, his father has seen the witch of the towpath himself. That's the name he gave her. He claims it's a specter of an old witch that died there, and that to this day, she haunts the towpath, and will chase anyone away who gets too close. I don't know, I'm still torn about what I saw. I don't know what it was. The way it moved was inhuman. The way it looked was inhuman. Maybe it really was a witch. Or maybe it was my grief-filled mind hallucinating something terrifying. Don't think I'll ever know. The witch played with mud. Submitted by